One of his names was Henry Budd, the Cree preacher who spread Christianity down the Sakachuwescum River, leaving behind a complicated legacy that earned him the title Apostle of the Swampy Cree. Somewhere beneath these tombstones are the graves of the first settlers of Manitoba, but there is an older history here.
I think it's important to reflect on historical figures like Henry Budd and realize, I see something in him that I also see in myself. I would like to see history taught differently. I don't believe that when we're talking in the context of Canadian history that there should be a dichotomy between Canadian history and an Indigenous history.
The way that the fur traders and the missionaries write about our people is it's wrong. Our voices aren't in those history books about who we were and what we did and how we lived.
Prince Rupert gave his name to the land, first visited by a brave company of daring adventurers.
Yes, but not exactly. In 1812, Budd was still called by his Cree name, Sakachuwescum.
Sakachuwescum. I guess it's going up a hill.
It's like he's coming up from the mountain, like from the hill.
And he certainly was going up the hill. His whole life was that.
Sakachuwescum grew up in a fur trading family near Kennesaw-Seepy, also known as Norway House Cree Nation.
They're kind of a classic indigenous fur trade family where they're tied between these two worlds.
Sakachuwescum was mixed race, the grandson of a wealthy fur trader from the Hudson's Bay Company, who sent care packages to his family, from England to the York Factory trading post.
His mother would have known about the fur trade, would have been inside the York Factory, and she has a sort of a sense of connection to the British kind of establishment.
So she entrusted her son to a British evangelist named John West, looking for First Nations children to bring to the Red River colony.
I had to establish the principle that the North American Indian of these regions would part with his children to be educated in white man's knowledge and religion.
In 1820, West started the first school in Western Canada here, known as the Mission School and Church. It's said to have served the children of retired fur traders, but that's not really the whole story.
He is to, on the one hand, serve as the pastor for the newly arrived Red River settlers and the retired Hudson's Bay people in Red River, and his other mandate is coming from the Mission Society, which is to evangelize and educate Indigenous people.
His goal was to train First Nations kids to become missionaries and go out and preach to their own communities. And he was actually ahead of his time in many ways, because he realized that you couldn't beat the Indian out of the kid and then have them survive out in Indian country. There was a hunter that lived at the mission, and he taught the kids how to hunt and made sure they knew how to hunt with bows and with rifles. They were encouraged to maintain their languages. They taught them animal husbandry, they taught them farming, they taught them carpentry, they taught them gunsmithy. Indigenous communities would welcome somebody that had something to offer.
By 1823, West had 10 students. 2 others died. At a time when Sakachuwescum should have been preparing for his traditional vision fast, West baptized him Henry Budd. All of the children at the mission school were given English names. 3 years later, a flood destroyed the entire Red River colony, including the school. When it was rebuilt, the First Nations ministry was moved out of the colony. After finishing school, Budd married Elizabeth Wark, and the couple had 2 children. He spent time as a school teacher and a laborer, but by the 1840s, Budd was sent north to convert more Cree souls using the same method as his teacher John West. Deep in the wilderness known as Opaskwayak, Budd built a mission, a schoolhouse, and a farm, intent on saving the Swampy Cree. It didn't go well.
The Cree people were not easily converted because they liked being who they were. We weren't farmers, we were hunters, trappers, fishermen.
Budd endured threats from fur traders, medicine men, and Roman Catholic missionaries, but his colony had taken root. 13 Cree children lived at his mission full-time. As the years passed, 40 permanent cabins formed a community at Opaskwayak. Parishioners flocked to the Christ Church to hear his lively Cree-spoken sermons, reading along with the Cree language Bibles that Bud helped translate. He did twice the work for half the pay of his English counterparts.
He got away from the books and started to do the land-based ministry. Land-based ministry is when you're actually out with the people, you're in the community, you're going from house to house, hunting, fishing, whatever. That, to me, is land-based. All that stuff that you do, taking the kids out camping, cultural camps, all these things. And I did that.
By 1850, the Cree preacher was big news back in England. Donations to the Mission Society poured in. Bud's pay was finally topped up to equal of an English missionary. Opaskwayak was thriving. He became the first fully ordained Indigenous minister in North America at the Christ Church in 1853. Others would follow. But not everyone thinks Bud's effect on his community was positive.
We became different in our outlook to ourselves, to our children, to our spirituality. Even today, some people think that the spirituality, the Medewan, is wrong. And that is the crime, I think, that maybe Henry Budd was put in.
He certainly adopts the European missionary attitude towards Indigenous spiritualities, right? This is superstition at best, and it is satanic witchcraft at worst.
There are 26 First Nations ministers with similar stories throughout the prairies. Winona Wheeler is the great-great-granddaughter of missionary Charles Pratt. For her, the voice in Pratt's writing felt like a betrayal.
Our understanding that was passed down about him was that he really loved his people and that he was a pipe carrier. And then I'm reading his journals that paint a totally different picture of him. And it just absolutely devastated me.
Devastation further driven home when she was posed a question by her grandmother.
She said, I always wondered if he really was the kind and loving soul the old people said he was, or if he was the first sellout. And I went, wow.
Bud also left detailed journals of his daily life. Keith Hyde of the University College of the North is combing through them, trying to get a sense of who Bud really was.
Certainly when it came to the suffering his family was going through, Bud really opens up and you really get a sense of the suffering and the pain and the compassion he feels as a father.
Most entries chronicle the work of the mission, but others tell a tragic story. Bud's greatest pain comes from the loss of his children. Of 13, only 3 survived to old age. Most died young, like 11-year-old Marianne.
We had scarcely finished a very short prayer and added our amen when the impatient spirit, eager to join in the song of the redeemed, took its flight.
Bud's most personal entry in the journals was written during a scarlet fever epidemic in Nepawawin that took his wife, Elizabeth, and 2 of his children.
During his mourning period, he had the wish that he could go back to the traditional ways of mourning.
What would I have not done to torture my body in every possible way, according to the custom of my tribe, cutting myself with knives and lancets until the blood would gush out profusely, cutting my hair, and going about barefoot and bare legs, and ready to go into the fire and into water, courting death rather than life. Thus would I have been mourning for my dear son, just departed.
Bud and other First Nations missionaries were never fully accepted into the church hierarchy. They were treated as servants to their higher-ranking white colleagues, but their contributions to history are undeniable.
The myth of Canadian settlement wasn't as cut and dry as the old history textbooks say it was, that there was Native people out there already trying to make adjustments. Their primary concern was helping people survive. I had no right to judge the attempts my ancestors made to make adjustments and to change.
He was taken away from his own community and his own family and things like that, and the tragedy of losing his parents' ways and his family's ways and his community's ways, I think that in and of itself is tragic.
And I think this whole area of talking about a person like Henry Budd is really important, that our people will remember who he was and how much work he did up here.
After witnessing Canada become a country and Manitoba a province, Budd died in 1875 of the flu. The next year, Opaskwayak Cree Nation signed on to Treaty 5. In 1906, the community was forcibly moved to the south side of the Saskatchewan River, leaving Henry Budd separated from his people one last time.